How Writing Enhanced My Strategic Storytelling Skills by J.B. Story. Hi, I'm J.B. Now, to be honest, I don't really look like this, but for the sake of today's discussion, just imagine this odd caricature up on stage, sharing a presentation about how storytelling helped them develop and hone their strategic storytelling dexterity, or at the very least, how they think it helped them. With that in mind, let me explain what to expect with this presentation. Firstly, I'm going to provide you with some background information about little old me. And after that, we're going to discuss the fundamentals of storytelling and share a renowned framework for structured narrative. Then, I'll demonstrate the application of this structure to a very popular film. After that, we will dig into strategy, what it means, and the infrastructure I use for strategic storytelling. Then we're going to review a well-known business case study about the application of strategy and how it turned around the fortunes of a large manufacturing company. After that, we'll reverse engineer the strategy they used, applying my strategic storytelling infrastructure, and how that same structure is similar to the framework used for storytelling. Right, hopefully you're still with me after all that waffling. And if you are, let's get cracking, shall we? Let's start with some information about my professional background. Since about 1996, I've worked at a variety of companies, both on the client and service side. And in nearly all of my experiences, I've focused primarily on digital marketing and merchandising, with a side order of content strategy and brand strategy. Now, my side hustle. Since approximately 1998 or so, I've written plays, screenplays, produced short films, and even kindly wrote a pretty crappy book. Now, does all of this make me a good writer? Not even close. If I was, this wouldn't be a side hustle, right? But my limited success in this space has never extinguished my passion for storytelling. Nowadays, I mostly write as a creative outlet, and every once in a while, somebody might notice something I've written and will produce the material. For example, An Angel Whispers was a short screenplay I wrote a couple of years ago and was recently produced and distributed by a North Carolina production company. This doesn't happen often, but to be honest, when it does, it really is thrilling. Now, one of the delightful and unexpected benefits from all of this writing is that I've learned a tiny bit about story structure and character development that in turn I've unconsciously and consciously applied to my professional life. One such lesson I've learned from writing relates to how we share ideas in the workplace. In my modest experience, if you want someone to listen, understand, and accept your ideas, the most valuable way to communicate to them is through storytelling. That doesn't negate everything that we've learned about SWOT analysis, data-driven insights, KPIs, work-back schedules, goals, etc. All of those things and more are profoundly critical. However, this doesn't mean that they can't be structured in the same way that we would tell a story. It sounds relatively straightforward, right? So let's start with the basic question. What is a story? If you really think about it for a moment, what are some of the initial explanations that come to mind? Now, personally speaking, I found it's not that simple to articulate. However, we all know exactly what a story is because our brains have been hardwired for tens of thousands of years to recognize stories and to learn from them. For the sake of this discussion, let's default to the following definition. A story is the structured expression of an event, be it true or fictional, in a manner that the listener emotionally reacts and/or learns something by virtue of receiving the narrative. The story conveys information to the listener that in turn initiates a cognitive reaction. Moreover, every story has a teller and a listener. I really like this quote from Mary Catherine Bateson. She does a wonderful job of artfully explaining the crux of storytelling. You see, storytelling is perhaps the most important learning function of the human race. Arguably, it's the primary reason we have survived for as long as we have. We tell stories to ourselves and others to help us make sense of our feelings, emotions, and augment our understanding of the world and the human experience at large. Because story, in its most fundamental form, is about survival. Indeed, we've been telling stories since the first cavemen scrawled on their cave walls. Their stories were actually lessons. Their stories help to explain from generation to generation everything from how to hunt, what foods to avoid, places to shelter, and clans to evade. So it stands to reason that, contemporarily speaking, storytelling is the singular most powerful way to help people understand and retain an idea. However, to be effective at this, you must start by understanding how to tell a story, which begins with both a literal and figurative blank page. This wide open space can feel daunting. It can feel vulnerable, like it's you against the world. There are so many options and inputs, but how do you make sense of all that information and translate it into a story that has a beginning, middle, and end? To start with, it's important to acknowledge that every story contains unique blocks of content that on their own don't have much rhyme or reason. But if you follow step-by-step instructions on how to assemble them, those pieces can be organized to form a coherent structure. The structure for a story is deceptively simple. Some will refer to this framework as crisis conflict resolution. Others will say stories consist of 3 acts. But those descriptions can be abstract and a little bit vague. The best description I've encountered regarding story structure is from Brian MacDonald, author of the excellent book Invisible Ink. In his book, he outlined 7 steps to storytelling. And once you understand each of these steps, you'll find yourself nodding in agreement, as they're familiar and they contextualize what you already instinctively understand about story structure. These linear steps help us go from that sense of instinct to actual understanding, and once you get it, you'll probably find yourself thinking about this framework whenever you're watching a movie or reading a book or sitting down to take in your favorite TV program. So let's briefly examine these 7 steps. It starts with once upon a time. This sets up the reality of when and where your story takes place. Who or what is the focus of their story? And most importantly, it provides the context and rules of this universe you're introducing to the audience. And every day is step 2. This step supports what you've already established and shows us what day-to-day looks like in this universe. In short, here's how things are presently going in this world. Which leads us to step 3, until one day. This is when an inciting incident occurs, an event that moves the story from humdrum linear happenings of day-to-day life. This is where the true story begins, as something has occurred that requires an action to be taken that will have consequences. Now we go into Act 2. The first half of Act 2 is "and because of this." It's the initial reaction to the change. How does it affect the main characters and their situation? They are forced to plan and pick a path to do something related to the change that has occurred, a solution to a problem that will trigger action and reaction. Which brings us to the second half of Act 2, another "and because of this." Typically, the second act has two parts, and this second part of the second act is typically a resulting action from what was originally planned or done in the first part of Act 2. So what is the result of this action? What's changed that continues to drive the story forward? What have they learned? How is their focus sharpened? They go from need to want. Until finally, this is the beginning of the end of the story. It's the manifest action that triggers a chain reaction that leads to a resolution in response to the change incited at the end of Act 1. The inciting incident from until one day is now resolved. And every day since. Often this is the shortest part of the story. This is the denouement, the they lived happily ever after moment. A way to let the audience know what life is now like after the big change and what it will probably be like in the future. Sounds relatively straightforward, right? So let's review an example of this structure in action using a very popular movie that most should be familiar with. And if you're not familiar with this, that's just really strange. Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, lived a young man called Luke Skywalker, the nephew of a farmer living on a desert planet with dreams of becoming a space pilot hero fighting for the rebellion against the evil Empire. Every day, Luke did his chores on the farm for his Uncle Owen Lars, and every once in a while, if he was a good boy, he'd be given permission to visit the Tashi station to pick up power converters and occasionally some of that really weird blue milk. Luke's life was of constraint and frustration, for he couldn't see a way to fulfill his dreams of becoming an intergalactic pilot badass. Until one day, he and his Uncle Owen picked up some new droids from a traveling market run by Jawas. Luke takes them home and fixes them up. While doing so, the faulty R2 unit they acquired belches out a video message for a mysterious man called Ben Kenobi, beseeching this man Ben to help the Rebel Alliance. And as we know, for Luke, this is the turning point of the story, the big change that triggers Luke's journey. And because of Luke's decision to take action, he locates the enigmatic Ben. Nope, make that Obi-Wan Kenobi, former Jedi and general all-around nice bloke. From there, they hire the Jack Sparrow of space piracy, Han Solo, and his walking fur rug of a friend, Chewbacca, to help them find the princess, whom they both find kind of sassy and attractive, which is fine for one and kind of creepy for the other. Eventually, all of this leads them directly to the Death Star. And because of this, they rescue the princess, they get the plans to how to destroy the Death Star, and unfortunately lose their traveling companion Obi-Wan Kenobi, in what can only be described as the laziest lightsaber fight in the history of lightsaber fights. Until finally, they bring the blueprints of the Death Star to the Rebel Alliance, who then plan a daring mission to destroy the wretched ball of imperialism. They then set off on the mission, resulting in the destruction of their target, and young Luke ultimately fulfills his dreams of becoming a hero by being the one to fire the fateful shot that makes the Death Star go boom. And ever since that day, Luke and his reluctant roguish friend Han become heroes of the Rebel Alliance and join their effort to take down the mighty Empire. Sadly, Chewie wasn't considered worthy of a medal, but no worries, he gets one about 30 or 40 years later because, well, reasons, right? So that example of how the storytelling framework functions can be utilized for the vast majority of stories you've read, listened to, and watched. Try it out the next time you're watching a movie or reading a book. You'll be surprised at the pervasiveness of this structure. So now let's move on and discuss strategy. Let's start with the standard definition. A strategy is an approach to how we tackle a problem, need, and/or opportunity. It starts with identifying the problem, need, or opportunity, understanding whom or what is the focus of this, then forming meaningful insights. In turn, that helps to define the behavior or sentiment you want to influence, as well as the specific idea you intend to implement. Following this, you establish a set of actions and goals designed to change and/or alter the behavior or sentiment of your target. From that point forward, all decisions, objectives, and tactics should line with this strategic direction. Generally speaking, forming a strategy can be relatively straightforward. However, sharing or explaining a strategy can be complicated and occasionally vexing. You have a great idea, but getting others to understand or buy into your idea requires an approach that will engage the intended audience. That's where I found using a strategic storytelling framework can help. This framework involves the following 7 steps. Step 1 is purpose and context. Why are we here and what are we talking about? Situation and need is the second step. What is going on that is driving a need to make a change? What is the problem and/or opportunity and pain points? What is the actual problem? Step 3 is change and direction. What is the change we are proposing? Why and who is the 4th step. Insights derived from research, testing, analysis help explain this path and rationalize it, and the who or what is the target of this change is also identified. Step 5 is solution and dependency. This is the manifestation of the why and whom through action designed to influence our target's behavior and/or sentiment. Step 6 is plan and actions. This is the plan for enabling change and the corresponding actions needed to make this change come to life. Lastly, we have goals and KPIs. These are the specific goals, related KPIs, and reporting that will tell us if this change has been successful. Given the framework I just explained, let's examine a well-known case study that is a perfect definition of what it means to change the fortune of a company by introducing a change strategy. Alcoa is a manufacturing company that produces aluminium. They were highly successful, but saw sales decline through the 1980s. So in turn, their fortunes needed to be turned around. So they hired a new CEO. Paul O'Neill was the man they hired for the job, a somewhat debatable decision, given that his background was primarily in civil service. Nevertheless, he came to the table with a unique perspective on how to save the company from fading into oblivion. His strategic focus was on changing what is known as a keystone habit. In the case of Alcoa, this habit pertained to safety. His elevator pitch to investors was that he intended to make Alcoa the safest manufacturing plant in the United States. He said, "I knew I had to transform Alcoa, but you can't order people to change. That's not how the brain works. So I decided I was going to start by focusing on one thing. If I could start disrupting the habits around one thing, it would spread throughout the entire company." O'Neill was looking for something that everybody could agree was important, something everyone could get behind. So he focused on safety. While workers might not relate to ROI or shareholder value, everyone can understand that making the workplace safer is good for them and their friends and colleagues. As a result, this drove people to rethink, re-examine, and change everything to align with this strategy. It drove collaborative efforts to evolve processes in every facet of the business. When O'Neill left Alcoa in the year 2000, the company's income was 5 times higher than when he'd started, and its market value had increased from $3 billion to over $27 billion. It was a nearly impossible turnaround. Alcoa became a paragon of safety. They changed their habits, designed new habits, and transformed the company. So let's reverse engineer O'Neill's strategy. and how he was able to systematically explain and sell his approach to employees, investors, and Wall Street. But let's do this using the 7-step strategic storytelling structure referenced earlier and overlay the corresponding step in storytelling terms. In step 1, purpose and context, we set the stage by explaining the purpose of this effort and provide context to the discussion so that the audience has a sense of where you are starting from. So, Alcoa has been around for over 100 years, enjoying a virtual monopoly on the aluminium production in the United States for the first half of that century. But antitrust regulations, stiffer competition, and an oversupply in the marketplace has led to a financial crunch. The company is lagging their competitors in terms of sales, innovation, and human capital. A profound change is needed, otherwise the company is doomed. Step 2 is situation and need. This is where we explain to the audience in more detail what is the current situation we are facing, and what is it that we need to overcome to make this a reality. So, Alcoa's situation is dire. The company needs to turn things around, and quickly, but it won't be an easy fix, as there are problems all over the company. Wall Street's losing faith, therefore stock value is dropping precipitously. Competitors are filling the spaces and crying out for innovation. The company is also bleeding talent. Our production and supply chain processes are at the center of this crisis. They are inefficient and antiquated. It would seem that there is very little that this company can turn to as a matter of pride. In fact, the safety record is about one of the few things being done right. Indeed, it's worth noting that Alcoa has the best safety record in the aluminium industry. Problem is, safety isn't sexy. Safety doesn't fill the coffers. Safety doesn't get Wall Street back on your side. It doesn't lure the best talent either. Nor does it drive innovation. Or does it? Step 3, change in direction. This is where we declare what we intend to change and in turn, what direction is required for us to enable this change. So, the company must transform its processes top to bottom. So let's start by focusing on one thing. If the company can start disrupting the habits around this one thing, it can spread throughout the entire company, shifting the very foundations on which the company was built. Which is why the key to turning fortunes around is to make Alcoa the safest manufacturing business in the United States. This shift in prioritization will increase collaboration and innovation in all parts of Alcoa's business. Step 4, why and who. This is where we explain via insights why this new direction will work and who needs to be involved to make the change happen. So, we know that Alcoa's workers in the plants and at corporate need to be the enablers of this change. However, can't just order people to change. It's not easy to motivate employees. You need to win hearts and minds. They need to feel passionate about the path forward. They need to feel like they're owners of this remedy. Therefore, health and safety is the logical North Star that can align the entire workforce to come together and make manifest this change. All employees agree that this is important. It's something everyone can get behind. Because while all workers might not relate to improving ROI or shareholder value, everyone can understand making work safer for themselves and their friends. Step 5, solution and dependency. This is when we specify details of the solution and identify the core dependencies required for facilitating this transformation. So, the company needs to start by investigating and fixing the causes of injuries. It must become a top management and employee priority, which in turn will be woven into the very fabric of the company. This means that safety must become a keystone habit, because prioritizing a safe workplace that is designed to minimize injuries, the company must then understand why machines break, why issues fail to be communicated, and why workers aren't properly trained on safety procedures. Therefore, all processes have to be re-examined and optimized from pillar to post. The company must depend on everyone, no matter where they work or what they work on, to make safety their number one priority. Step 6 is plan and actions. This is when we get into more detail about the specific plan needed to enact the change. This includes the specific actions needed to manifest the solution. So for Alcoa, to make this change happen, the company needs a master plan and a subset of project plans for each of the areas of the business impacted by this new direction. This starts by conducting detailed analysis of injuries that occurred in each of these manufacturing plants over the last 5 to 10 years. The company needs to know what caused the injuries and how they were acted upon. How was the injury reported? What steps were taken to prevent a similar injury from happening? What issues prevent the company from modifying key processes? And what will it take to traverse these obstacles? In short, every facet of production and workflow must be put under the microscope and examined under the pretense of safety. A process is needed for tracking these safety numbers. A reimagining of how we reward employees must be contingent on the sharing of ideas and the mutual alignment on key principles, etc., etc., etc. Clearly, Alcoa's plan would stipulate more than just the aforementioned regressive analysis, safety reporting, and employee commitments. But for the sake of time and simplicity, let's just say that these are some of the areas a plan like this would cover. Lastly is step 7, goals and KPIs. This is when we go into the specific goals and related KPIs and reporting that will tell us if our change has been successful. So here's how this might get framed up for Alcoa. The company will commit to the following goals for improving workplace safety, process efficacy, and operational expediency. We will report on the following key performance indicators. Starting with our workflow processes, we will aim to make them 70% faster and more efficient. We will target an 80% decrease in injuries per year. And if an injury does occur, a COE report with an SLA of 2 weeks from when the accident has occurred will be put into place. Each department will also have shared goals around safety, therefore prompting collaboration and mutual investment in the plan. If the company commits to this path forward, we anticipate a productivity growth of 60% and a decrease in operational expenditures of 40%. Yada, yada, yada. And as we know, this plan and approach turned out to be a hugely successful strategy for Alcoa. However, it shouldn't be lost that this change all started with an idea. O'Neill's keystone strategy was simple, yet highly effective method to induce change. But as with all groundbreaking ideas, the devil is in the details of how the idea gets communicated to those whose support is needed to transform the idea into reality. This is where the power of strategic storytelling comes into play. The structure for strategic storytelling I introduced earlier is in essence an amalgamation of a standard strategy framework and the building blocks required to tell a story. Both of these actually have much in common. Let's break this down. If you align each step of the previously referenced frameworks against each other, you can see there are striking similarities, starting with once upon a time equals purpose and context. Both are needed to set the stage. And every day has a direct parallel with situation and need, as both unpack what the current situation is relative to how the stage has been set. Then we have until one day. This equals change in direction. Both are an inflection point based on a change of direction. The first and because of this is the who and the why. Both explain the what and whom does the initial change influence and impact, and why it will have an impact. Action will prompt reaction. And the second, and because of this, equals solution and dependency. This is the decisive decision needed to go forward, along with what is required to make that decision come to life. Then we have until finally. This is plan and action. The penultimate blocks in these frameworks embody the specific plan and related actions needed to reach a desired resolution. Lastly, we have and everyday since is the equivalent of goals and KPIs. These final sections mutually specify what success looks like and how the success impacts everyone now and in the future. Why don't we see how that lines up with the story of Star Wars and the storytelling strategy for Alcoa? Once upon a time equals purpose and context. Effectively, they're doing the same thing, which is to say they're introducing the audience to your story. Then we have and every day. This equals situation and need. Both espouse what's currently going on day to day and help the audience immediately understand the situational stakes. Then we have until one day. This signals a change to the audience. It tells us the direction the story will be taking. Likewise, change in direction establishes what needs to change and the direction required to enable that change associated with the strategic idea. And because of this, once a change has been made, we then see the initial reaction, which is driven by the what and who. What do they need to do and who is involved? Correspondingly, why and who of the strategic storytelling framework helps us understand why the direction taken is the right choice, and the who explains why the target of this change will respond favorably to this direction. And then we have the second, and because of this, our characters take what they have learned from the initial actions and transform that clarity into need and want. In the same vein, solution and dependency follows the insights and understanding gleaned from the why and the who, ultimately culminating in a crystallization of what is needed and what is required to enable this given solution. Until finally, this is the beginning of the end of the story. It's the plan, decision, and direction that triggers a chain reaction that leads to a resolution that enables our protagonist, or group of protagonists, to achieve their goal. Likewise, plan and action is the direction and blueprint. This is how we will land and execute the changes derived from the strategy. Lastly, we have and everyday since. This equals goals and KPIs. These final sections mutually specify what success looks like and how that success impacts everyone involved, both now and in the future. So as you can see, strategic storytelling can be a really powerful way to capture the attention of your intended audience. Because at the end of the day, you took them on a narrative journey that instinctively feels to them like a story. Therefore, making it completely relatable and understandable. Most importantly though, if done right and the idea has merit, you might have a better chance of seeing it come to fruition if you frame that idea through the potent paradigm of strategic storytelling. And that, as they say, is that. Thank you for watching this video, and I humbly hope that maybe, just maybe, you got something useful out of it, even if nothing more than laughing at this rather laughable figure on the stage. Thank you, and until next time, that's all, folks. See you again.